extra water.
Okay, hi guys, welcome to the quarterfinals of Yellow Sea. Congratulations guys, we're great and proud of you. We have the charities now, that you can see is NT and G. The G is here with the C, the other is EJ, Junada, and swipe right. Alright, without further ado, I'd like to invite Prime Minister
Sorry, yeah. The 21st century is unique in having devised various mechanisms for the rich to evade taxes. They've been able to pump money via shell companies, via fancy tax accounting schemes, and ultimately not able to pay their fair share of due. Whether it be lobbying for governments to include think tanks and pet projects as charities, or perhaps we even contend that governments are better actors to use this money, we think that ultimately it means that the rich are able to skew the way that society is able to keep them accountable. And we think that's very, very bad. So ultimately it means that charities have sort of grade the fact that they are presumably supposed to be altruistic, but are not very much intended to serve the rich's purpose. I'll talk about three things in my speech. Firstly, the majority of the wealth, the majority of the money we're talking about, which is directed to charities that do not benefit society at large. Secondly, why we contend that the portion donated to benevolent charities will still be very large. And thirdly, even in a worst case scenario where the rich people do indeed benefit benevolent charities, why even then governments are better actors of this money? Firstly, let's talk about the majority of these cases where the rich donate to charities that do not benefit society at large. What am I talking about here? Presumably I'm talking about organizations that claim to be charities but very much register as non-profit, right? So these are things such as, for example, the Heritage Foundation in the that promote conservative agendas. We're also talking about pet projects that, for example, Mark Zuckerberg pursues in promoting his own particular goals. Because these things are non-profit, the way that the organization systems and administrative systems work is that they're able to register these particular things as charitable organizations. But we're just going to give two very important reasons why the rich are likely to donate their wealth to these things as opposed to the others. No, thank you, Amrit. Firstly, recognize that the rich very much have vested interests regarding these particular things. That is to say that the rich are not going to be prone to just spending their money to benevolent things, versus presumably do indeed want a return on their wealth. This means things such as David Koch pushing Republican agendas and investing in the Heritage Foundation because he wants to see Republican agendas surge into society. These are the sort of things that we don't think benefit society, but are instead being driven by these rich people because they want to see their best interests in shape. But secondly, we also think that let's just look at the trends of the wealthy in this particular circumstance, right? They're not benevolent. These are people who have an intention and goal of wanting to make their wealth leave the economies. That is to say that they are not going to donate to benevolent charities, but rather in other forms of charity that does not actually benefit society, but rather some other goal that they may have. Conclusion here is that they're not prone to wasting money, but rather pursuing their own particular agendas. No, thank you. Let's talk about the second issue then. Let's talk about the portion that is donated to benevolent charities. We will contend that it will still be donated under both sides of the house. We have to contend that the disincentive here is the amount of money that the rich people would have not had in the instance where this where this wealth is not tax deductible. No, thank you, sir. Firstly, let's talk about the very altruistic individuals who are still likely to donate in both sides of the house. Because the comparative necessarily is, there still exist rich people who do very much donate to feel good, who do very much donate to feel as if they have some effect in Africa, for instance. And we also see this in, for example, when Bill Gates and Melinda Gates established the Gates Foundation to ensure that African children have their goods being given to them, right? So in these particular circumstances, these individuals will not be deterred by their wealth being tax deductible because they're still likely to donate regardless of their situation. But secondly, let's talk about also the super wealthy individuals who very much have wealth to spare. We're talking about people like Muhammad Yunus, the creator of microfinance. These are individuals whose wealth being tax deductible will not be a significant dent on their wealth. This necessarily means that they don't necessarily find a disincentive by this tax deduction to still donate. So they'll still donate because they don't necessarily see this as an impediment on them being able to accrue wealth and are still likely to donate because they have shitload of money, right? So compared to this ops world, they define a world where a very small, minute number of individuals will still lose out on donating. That's the world that we think they have to defend. Closing, do you have anything?
Yeah, so recognize that rich people donate because of the public PR that they get from donating to charities. Under your side, when they lose this at the point at which they still have to spend money on taxes and they have to spend additional money to donate, why are they still likely to do this?
They'll still get public PR outside the house, like presumably still be shown. And because these rich people are rich, presumably they can eat the money of public PR and still very much garner the benefits of being seen as an altruistic body. Let's talk about our worst case scenario. In the benevolent situations, why the governments are far better spenders of money in this particular circumstance. Because you have to recognize that the money that you can accrue from tax deductions is very much money that could be directed to government coffers and being used by the government. We're going to give 4 reasons why the governments are presumably better actors in this situation. Firstly, recognize that charities very much have to look and plan for short-term relief instead of long-term infrastructural development. This means, for example, that charities are far more likely to aid the poor via providing them with mosquito nets instead of microfinance schemes or building infrastructures in Africa. We're going to give, I think the primary reason that the charities act this way is because they're beholden to immediate results. Because they have to ensure that people donate to them, and they have to show very graphic images of, for example, the poor in Africa being given mosquito nets as opposed to a building there, right? Comparatively, we think the government is accountable every 5 years and is better able to plan long term because they're not beholden to the same short term incentives. So I think in that circumstance, the government is the better actor. Second reason, recognize that the charities are also far less accountable because they are very much feel-good driven, right? Insofar as someone can see that a charity is presumably giving some graphic benefit to another poor person, that means that you don't necessarily check and scrutinize on that particular charity. But we contend that the government side is not necessarily perfect, but comparatively governments are checked by people who scrutinize and want to know where the tax money is going. Governments are accountable every 5 years via election, versus the charity who is barely accountable, if not at all, because people believe that the charity is ultimately pursuing its own altruistic aims. Thirdly, recognize that charity drives also leads very much to wastage in attracting money. This means that money spent on banners, money spent on television ads. Comparatively, while governments still conduct charity drives, the money spent is dipped from political campaigns by individual actors as opposed to one that is tax money. So in that particular circumstance, we think that the amount of money being wasted is also far more on the other side of the house because money is spent from the charity pool, which is now being spent to attract more donations. But fourthly, recognize that charities also face very much a race to the bottom. What I mean by this? This means that charities compete on who can get most money. This means that charities presumably face a lot of competition in terms of showing the most graphic images and showing the images that are likely to attract the most people. In those particular circumstances, they compete on who can attract the most grief. We think that is worse because it means that charities are far less likely to look at things objectively and donate to things that have very immediate visceral aims as opposed to governments who can invest in long-term projects. Governments have access to statistics, governments are not prone to the same emotional incentives, and governments are likely to make very good long-term decisions. For all these reasons, very proud to propose.
The various mechanisms have a hierarchy. We see that the worst off, tax havens, lobbying, all these things that Kelly says is so harmful, will become empowered and people have an incentive to enter into those versions comparative to charities. I think that charities are the best way if they are actually going to do this. But here's where I'll deal with the speaker before me in two responses before moving on to my arguments. On first, why it's principally justified as a result of having your duty fulfilled through charities, and secondly, how comparatively less money to the state is better than less money to charities. Essentially, the position of side opening opposition is that you should be able to contribute, insofar as you can contribute to charities, you should have your tax deducted. This means that no matter what income level you are, if you donate, the tax is proportional, tax that is deducted is proportional to what you donate. And we think that you can regulate like NGOs and increase accountability and fairness is set in our world. But here's why I'll provide you a comparative to that. But first, 3 responses. Let's look at the bad charities. And look, we have standards to what charities can do. At the very least, it does provide some benefits to people on the ground. If you are unable to do that, you wouldn't be able to register as a charity. But secondly, there's an assumption that if you are conservative, if it's a conservative charity, therefore it equals to evil. But if people genuinely feel that their needs are being provided for conservative causes, we don't know why they're evil. But we also say that if it's about political agendas, essentially if you find political agendas so harmful, this money now goes straight to the politician as a result of this these rich people not being able to find any other way to do so. The last thing we'll say is that we don't know why benevolent intentions is more important than the actual money that is being put to the ground. We don't care the intentions of that individual insofar as some money enters into the benefit of people that states cannot do. And I'll explain to you that in my argument. But here's where we also respond to this idea, whether or not these rich people will actually donate. Because they were largely defensive in this. They say that there are lots of rich people that are altruistic, but they can't say that every rich person will funnel their money into bad charities, but also say that there's a huge people that are altruistic. Then they can't say that there are super rich individuals, but also this is not true, right? It's not true that individuals are super rich. So we think that in the open opposition side, we will deal with many groups of people. That there are people who are super rich and would not mind donating to their money, but they'll be less likely to do this because there are less feel-good charities in their side, which they literally reduce. But we say that there are individuals that are altruistic, but even then they are a minority. But we say that minority will decrease even more as a result of now having to feel a pinch, and they have financial considerations now, right? They force people to remove themselves from donation because donation is now a luxury. But the last people are the ones that are really evil, and you're more likely to have all your mechanisms for tax evasion. Those are individuals who will now enter into the worst versions instead of charity. So essentially, they have less money on their side because they tie a cost to charities to begin with. The last one to respond to is this idea about charities being short-term. Look, the fact that they can use microloans as an example means that microloans are one version of charities. There might be some that are mosquito nets, but how dare you say that mosquito nets are important to individuals who suffer from malaria? That's harmful in their world. But here's where we say that essentially, the government is less accountable than these charities to begin with, right? Because of the competition essentially creates new versions of charities because they have to compete with each other in order to be the best versions of charities in order to compete with each other. This means that governments are less accountable because they have more ability to cover up compared to charities. Like Joseph Kony, the Kony campaign essentially was taken down as a result of people actually having a tie to that charity and feeling that they wanted that charity to be accountable. But I will move on to my arguments on why it's principally justified, right? The duties that we have right now is that if you contribute to a good, you therefore have fulfilled your duty. So for example, veterans are financially incentivized by having free pensions, or civil servants get healthcare and insurance. Essentially, the state loses money if it means that you are incentivized to do things that the state otherwise could not do. This means that you fulfill a duty. But here's where charities have a unique duty that is performed. We see that you create a different reach to compared to a government, right? The fact that you have access to organizations and collaboration with those organizations, communities that believe in you, like ECTA, which is a organization for Punjabi women by Punjabi women, or Emily's List that specifically helps women, have a different reach compared to states. Because states essentially inherently, even if we take down the best case scenario, the states are really great. Essentially, as a result of the large institution that is what the state is, they are unable to be nuanced in the ways in which they fulfill their duty. This means that if you actually donate to charity, you fulfill a duty that is unique to you and not the state. But so there are services in charities that are unique as well. For example, raising of awareness, fundraising, community building. The state is unable to perform given its large infrastructure. The fact that the state is also oftentimes complicit. So the fact that states infrastructure is dilapidated and charities are able to exist to combat that state complicity is better on our side compared to theirs. That's why we say that essentially that principle is fulfilled. Before I move on to the harms, closing.
Why do you think that it's fair for the specific needs to be fulfilled at the cost of general society losing their money for healthcare and education?
No. They are the general society doesn't lose out because general society is filled with nuanced individuals. It's a collective of individuals that if we help one individual that is nuanced, it's better on our side. But here's where we say that more money in charities is also better, right? We say that essentially many rich people won't donate in their will as a result of the pinch of taxation, or the charity is now a luxury. Essentially, the government government then cannot fiat, there will be actual proper distribution of that money. So for example, the fact that the government spends so much on military, that social welfare is politicized, that essentially is hugely bureaucratic, it spends so much time just to even get welfare, means that charities have a more ability to actually have more value to each dollar that they spend, right? Each dollar that you spend not only gets to the person and helps that person financially, but also creates community building, creates an awareness that is differently nuanced compared to a government social welfare. But we also see there's more buy-in for charities. The fact that charities are able to use this feel-good method, but also can remain neutral compared to a political government, means that people are more trusting of charities, so that they're more willing to take money from a charity compared to social welfare. But we also say the last thing is that, like, if they say that we want to be more accountable, like, charities are more accountable given the fact that they're not beholden to lobbying and they're not beholden to anyone else besides the people that they claim, that they promise to help. So if I promise to help, like, specifically poor Chinese women, that's the only demographic that I'm catering to, because I know that the moment that I stop catering to them, I no longer have the buy-in that I currently exist upon. This means that they're actually more accountable compared to, like, states that are either lobbied or lobbied. And literally, they can, like, rich people will now lobby individuals and they'll now lobby governments to lessen the taxes, right? Like, essentially, the ability for us to turn the wheel of societal protection and societal well-being is better when you empower the hands of charities. They trade this off in their world.
Okay, anybody want to go now?
We used to think that the global rich don't contribute their fair share to the economy. Turns out we were wrong. They don't contribute anything to the economy. They have effectively left the economy in today's world. With the advent of the added scrutiny on offshore accounts and shell companies, we have turned to a new mechanism of creating foundations and trusts of their own from which they then derive wages and are able to then not pay tax to the government. We think this has to stop to a massive extent. I'm going to talk about three things. First, I'm going to talk about exactly like Khalis's structure. First, why is it that we stop a lot of tax avoidance? That is money that would not have gone to any usage of this society whatsoever in opposition's world. Second, in terms of like, why is it that people who are donating to the benevolent people on which opposition relies, why these are people who by and large, to a large extent, we still get a lot of those benefits, even if not all of it. Third, why is it that even if they do all of that benefit, why a government is a better spender of that money than charity organizations? First, in terms of tax avoidance, we told you how often foundations such as political think tanks can technically qualify as charities, or pet projects like Mark Zuckerberg's educational institutions can technically qualify as charities even though they do nothing for the global poor and vulnerable people on the ground. Those are things often which technically qualify as charities, and that are used to often avoid tax because that they would rather fund their own pet projects or fund their own political ideologies as opposed to actually helping society or give tax to the government. You think, what was their response? Their response was, they will do more of those worst things in your world. What does this response mean? Like, presumably they do these worst things in our world because those things qualify as charity currently, and when they don't qualify as charity, it's not tax deductible, right? I think that's the, no thank you. Like, I don't understand what that response even means. Admittedly, if there are like other worse things that currently don't qualify as charity that are not tax deductible, then obviously they're still tax deductible and we still get that money out of them. So I really don't understand what that response even means in this debate. So the point is also, but let's assume like OP is able to somehow magically fiat out which educational centers are charities and which educational centers should not consist of charities, which political think tanks can be considered charities, which political think tanks can't be considered charities. Even under those circumstances, there are mechanisms they often use to evade tax. So for example, they will often donate to charities that are actually charities, and they will often put themselves as chairman of those boards and derive enormous amounts of wages which are no longer tax deductible from those charities in order to make sure they don't get taxed anyway. So even if you're talking about benevolent charities only being qualifying as charities, there are methods that they can use to make sure that they don't actually contribute anything to society while also making sure their money is not tax deductible by like funneling it around. First donate, then take wages from there. I think that's how they do it, right? And I think that's quite bad. So note that this is the vast majority of the kinds of things that are happening, and the middle class are by and large the ones who are funding the economy right now. If we win this debate, if we win this class, that should be way like that's enough already for us to win this debate. But let's talk about the minority of individuals, like who are benevolent, who want to contribute to like good causes. Why do we think, by and large, a lot of these things will still happen? I think it's a bit odd for opposition to be like, it's contradictory for you to say some are benevolent, some are not. Admittedly, just like you said, there are different groups of people, right? Like, fine. Okay, so in terms of like benevolent people, we think the reasons why often people donate to these charities who want to do it for benevolent reasons are people who want to derive some form of meaning in their life. These are people who are obscenely rich and want to feel like they make a contribution to society, want to feel good about themselves, want to feel like they're a good human being and not like the other 1% of the world who are screwing over the global poor. Admittedly, these people have a by and large incentive to keep on donating to a significant degree to these charities in order to make themselves feel that way about themselves. They can continuously make themselves believe they're good moral human beings. Admittedly, it's some sort of a financial pitch, but I'm unsure why the global rich, like having some level of added taxation on that will mean like suddenly they won't donate anymore. I think given the amount of money, obscene amounts of money these people have, I don't think that's a big enough deterrent on these people from doing so. It's a lot like the Republican argument all the time. Don't tax, otherwise they won't invest. It's not a real argument, right? No, thank you. And the third one is about why, assuming the best case scenario of opposition, why do we think even if their money stops going to like really awesome charities, why do we think that's still okay and governments are better decision makers? So Felice tells us a few things. Felice tells us, no, thank you. Actually, before I move on, does closing have anything?
Yeah, so the reason that they do this in the status quo is that this money is already a sunk cost. They're going to be paying it to taxes anyway.
Yeah.
I highly doubt that the good feeling that they get is worth millions of dollars extra that they're going to have to spend. So why would they still donate?
So maybe you're just contradicting yourself now because before that you said they really want to invest in their PR because that's one of the reasons. Admittedly, we are also talking about other things, right? So for example, yeah, to a certain extent, if it's a sunk cost and they would rather give it to a charity, we're fine with that comparative, right? Yeah. But I think there are also things that we are saying is that there are other considerations at play, like we just talked about, right? So for some people wanting to feel good about themselves is an act that makes people feel like they should donate to charities regardless. But also, admittedly, as a policy comes into play, your PR argument becomes even more important. It's a huge PR loss if suddenly, because it's tax deductible, people stop paying charities like they used to do. That's a huge PR disaster for them. That's a good enough incentive for them to keep paying charities. So keep paying to charities. Okay, moving on. But let's assume all of that is wrong. Why is Fidesz wrong in terms of saying charities are better? She says they're unique, they can do like niche things that governments can't. I don't understand why governments can't do unique niche things. Local governments exist for a reason. If people, then they're like, oh, but people don't trust the government, don't take money from them. Number one, that's a bit of an extreme characterization. But even if, governments can always cooperate with local organizations in terms of funding them to do certain things. I'm not sure why that's a problem in itself. But note importantly, all of these niche things can be done by government projects. But the question is, who decides what projects to do? I think that's a very important thing here. Because what charities get funded should not be decided by the extremely wealthy individual with their personal biases. Because this is person who has like gone through, for example, like if they're going to go ahead and give to cancer foundation because their family went through cancer, I don't think that's a good enough reason. Because the point is, maybe the cancer foundation needs it a lot less than another form of niche, unique benefit that needs to happen in society. Only governments have the access to statistics and information that requires them to make that good decision to begin with. But note that I think if all of the arguments they say is true, that the governments are not as accountable, which I think they are, because in the long run, if it's like 4 to 5 year campaigns, that's way more accountable. Charities are much less accountable, because charities don't compete on who is better. Charities campaign on images, on making you feel guilty, on making portray like as vulnerable people as possible. I don't think that's true accountability. But even if all of their arguments are true, the governments are really bad, I think that's not a reason to give less and less taxes. Because governments are the only ones who can create long-run infrastructure that charities are fundamentally incapable of providing for people on the ground because of the incentives Khalis also told you. So even if they are bad, you should keep on giving them tax, because even if it means they're bad users of money, you need to give them more for it to eventually reach the vulnerable people, because that's the only way you get them long-run solutions. We propose.
My speech. First, I'm going to prove that they have significantly less money being funneled to charities in the prop world. Second, I'm going to compare the incentive structure between charities and government, who we think are better actors, where we think money will be distributed better. But before that, I like to point out, I think the opening government fails to engage with the principal justification that we give you. Considering it is true that these individuals have given a unique service to the community, and for like a veteran does or a civil servant does, and the state compensates you for that unique responsibility you've given. Therefore, in principle, the state has an obligation to respond to this the same way it does in the status quo, by giving you a unique relief that benefits yourself. The state doesn't discriminate people's capacity to do good, because we don't understand why you deciding what is good or not is the standard, but rather you deciding to be good is the standard to which we protect individuals. I think insufficient response to that means you agree in principle with an obligation to return this favor to a rich person. First argument, first issue, let's talk about the degree of donation, because according to the opening government, they have three things. They say people are either altruistic or they care about PR and feel good, and therefore this model is independent of their interaction with money. Let's take a look at how pervasive we think this tax deductible is. You can look at their own characterization to give you the truth. The first thing we would suggest is, if you say people have incentive in the status quo to put money to offshore banks, into tax havens, that means they do indeed fear losing that money, because that money is significant. Because if it wasn't really significant, people would donate to taxes and have charities not being deductible anyway in the status quo, but they do. And the reason for it is because it's a huge amount of money. Consider the tax deductible in proportion to your income. So the top 1% of this country give it millions and dollars of money. Considering this premise is true, this means that financial incentive does indeed affect rich people to a significant extent. What is this extent? Because they say altruistic people do this for PR. I understand they care about PR, but look, now in your world, they want PR, but they are financially constrained from doing. They literally don't have the capacity to say, PR is going to put money up, going to be able to afford all the luxuries I have right now. You're literally financially crippling them. So it's true they care about PR, but do they care about PR more than their financial constraint? I'm uncertain why that is true. Second, they said, aha, they are really wealthy people, so they will donate anyway, because this is actually quite marginal. There's 0.25% of our community. First, we suggest this is a minority. These people, maybe I accept these people are going to donate anyway. I'm willing to concede that's true. But what's the vast majority of people? The vast majority of people are within your top 20% of the country. The percentage of community that are relatively rich, but the people still financially require assistance for their luxuries. You and I think they're luxuries, to them they think it's a necessity. These
people you literally financially burden from opting into charities. What's the harm of this? Which is my second issue in this debate. So I think considering we proved that it's a significant amount, the opening government can't suggest is a marginal amount that we're trading off in this debate. Second, incentive structures. I'm going to go through this quite thoroughly. First, they say, sit down. They have an incentive to opt into think tanks. So according to the opening government, they will lobby the system to make sure that regulations privilege think tanks that they think are beneficial. Two things to say about this. First, this vested interest is actually quite checked. So even it's true, and I believe the premise in the opening government that we have vested interest sit down to care about our think tanks and our own niche group, you will still have to do good things. Because no matter how much you want to invest yourself into a particular think tank, if they don't meet the criteria of donating back to communities or having a utility measurement of how successful they are, they would get shut down anyway. So I agree that invested interest, whether or not it leads to harm, you don't prove that link. But second, what's the comparative? The comparative is they would use this money in the proposition world to pump into lobbying to get that same vested interest back. If you're going to care about, for example, conservative religious values, I would rather you pump that money into a charity that provides to religious people for like Salvation Army, for example, as opposed to pumping money into politicians where you literally don't know what the incentives are. They're manipulating public policy and they pump money into political avenues. So I think on a comparative, vested interest is more checked in our. Second, accountability. According to the opening government, charities are unaccountable because their competition is based on feel good. Actually, I think that's a lot more accountable than governments. First, I think governments have a monopoly for 4 years to be uncompetitive. Until the next election term, you have a monopoly in deciding which charities you think are important, which political interests you care. If there's an event, if there's a scenario where you need to pump more money into military, the first place that gets cut is social welfare and taxes and welfare for poor people. So I'm uncertain why the government is more accountable considering it's giving a monopoly in the status quo. What's the comparative? You are juxtaposed to other charities. Whilst it's true, I agree that means there's a race to be more graphic, there's also a race to attract the most number of people to care about your cause. So I think on a comparative, we are more accountable to infrastructure that is long lasting. You are beholden to a short-term government that's politically motivated and is bound by election term. Third thing, long-term versus short-term. I'm going to have a bit of fun with this. Opening government suggests we are short-term, they are long-term. Let's analyze this. First, charities are actually quite long-term. The sustainability of your charity is like in time memorial. If you don't have any capacity to be accountable, the moment there's a scandal, the moment there's anything wrong, you don't get charity, the next organization gets it. What's the comparative? States. First, I think states are bound by election cycles. So the point at which you no longer run for election, you're no longer accountable. Lame duck presidents do the worst decisions in the status quo. But second, they are also beholden to specific demographics. As a result of gerrymandering, or like the fact that certain political blocks are stronger, you privilege whiter people than black people. So I'm uncertain why governments are A, more long-term, but B, accountable to at least an infrastructure that is at least more inclusive. But the third thing, it's a race to the bottom about graphic images. I'll take you after this. Great. We agree there's a race to the bottom in terms of graphic images. In a world in which you can cater to richer people give you more money, then you have less incentive to have graphic images because you get a constant flow of income. On a comparative in your world where there's less number of people that are giving money, you would use more graphic images because you want to coerce more and more people. So I'm uncertain why they get better competitive charities actually make it worse. What's the final comparison I'm going to make? They say, this is actually quite smart. They say, look, rich people shouldn't decide where money goes. The state should decide where money goes because the state is not as invested as you are because you pump money to cancer research, you don't have data, cancer research gets too much money. We have three responses to this. First, I think the state is a bad actor in terms of deciding where money goes and where money doesn't. It's politicized, it ensures a monopoly of its own individual force. But second, even if it's true, the best case scenario, I'll take you after this, where the governments really are, the individuals are really pumping money to places where they don't need it. I think more money into an institution makes it better. So cancer research should get more and more money. I'm uncertain why it's a bad thing in this debate, even if you put money into one specific area. Yes. I promised him. No. Yeah, I promised him.
So even if all of your arguments are true, we are still losing on billions of dollars of people using shell charities to avoid tax. Don't say yours is worse than this lobbying. That's tax deductible.
Look, people put money into offshore havens and taxes because they don't trust the government because they think that their money is being wasted and not being put in their interest. If you and your world are going to force them to opt into taxes, you don't give them an outcome to put their money to meaningful things, they would do offshore banking in your world, they would do tax havens because the comparator is paying money to your government in your world. So I am not certain how you make it worse or better. But the second, we also say charities are more trusted. This is important because Mubarak's frequent response is, I don't know why the state can't go into niche groups. Of course they can't. People don't trust the state for many reasons. Either it's religious or by the fact that I'm a persecuted minority means people don't trust states to do the business that they think their communities are. So I think at the end of the opening half exchange, it is clear that governments are worse actors in distributing money. But secondly and more importantly, we will significantly lose out on the amount of money circulating in charities. Everything is principally unjustified to allow this model to pass. Before we proceed to the thing we have, I just want to remind people of like the grace period of 15 seconds. So if your teammate sits down, just you don't like, it's not like a tag team thing. It's not a game. Okay? Okay. Remember, God.
Opening government demonstrate the possible benefits of preventing charity tax deductible towards the benefit of society receiving it. But we think since this is a policy debate upon what government is going to do in society, we need to put emphasis on the justification of government forcing the rich to still pay tax nonetheless if they already paid the charity to begin with. Or in other words, we need to talk about the wider obligation to contribute to society as a whole and not to only the niche specific individuals that they are actually targeting and willing to target to is an obligation that needs to be fulfilled in the principal level. So opposition cannot argue that within the opposition cannot argue that it's going to still benefit all layers of society under their side. Why? Because because if that's true that these people are actually still going to be able to benefit all, they do not also mind to actually get these policies to begin with, because they also donate to tax to begin with, and it's going to touch all layers of society. Because you need to understand the specific characteristic of charity in the very first place, right? It goes specifically to specific spectrum of society based on certain relatabilities. For example, like race or religion or certain areas where you live with, right? So we think opposition cannot argue that the benefits that these rich people will give still going to go to all layers of society, that they need to also engage that these benefits will also only exist in a particular society of a part of society. Because having that said, you need to understand the specific problem that is status quo right now. Not all vulnerable groups that needs actually the help from the government or from this kind of aids to begin with have a segmentation of rich people that can actually contribute relatively towards their problem in the very first place. In that context, we think government is much better actor, and we're going to prove why government is a better actor to redistribute this help towards this kind of people to begin with. So this debate needs to also talk about, and opposition should answer, why helping the vulnerable people is better catered if rich people are not actually, if rich people are actually getting the one controlling the donations. So before that, I have one rebuttal towards the case of opening opposition. So opening opposition basically relies their case upon the ideas that these rich people are going to resort to other methods of tax evasion and so on and so forth. First of all, if they're actually that evil that they want to tax evade in the very first place, they would have done that in the very first place and not resort to charity. The fact they actually do steal charity, or all of them, or at least most of these kind of rich people, are doing charity not because they want to actually evade tax, but because they anchor the interest of doing their charity because of they want to do and help something in the society to begin with. That means that they're still going to do charity anyway, even if you're going to impose certain tax towards them at the end of the day. Because the reason that we do is because of the altruist reason in the very first place. But second of all, it's not that we are not doing anything to actually prevent and restrict the ability of these people to do tax evasion in status quo right now, right? We can also do it hand in hand under government side of the house. We can, for example, put a stricter, auditing policies towards the companies to actually make them able to actually not do tax evasion and so on and so forth. So we think that's not a problem of tax evasion to begin with. But third and most importantly, if the system is actually that bad to prevent these people from doing tax evasion to begin with, then how are you going to also ensure that the charity under your side is also going to be regulated well by the government at the end of the day, right? We don't think that's a trade-off that they didn't also take if they want to accuse us of not being able to redistribute the tax from the government. Well, so 3 issues in my speech. First of all, I'm going to talk why principally the rich people should be taxed even if they do already give some charities to begin with. 2 analysis. First of all, you need to understand that the charity that I've told you before is exclusive in nature, that it's only going to contribute certain specific layers of society in the very first place. You need to understand that the corporate wealth of these kind of individuals are coming from the multi-layers of society. Their consumers are also the exploitation of resources that they get damaged in society are not only affecting specific individuals that they want to actually repay to, but it actually also harms the entire layers of society that they might actually also harm in the very first place, right? That's why we think they still need to pay the tax in the very first place because the harm that they created and should be compensated to the layers of society that they're not going to cater in the ideas of charity to begin with, right? Because charity only targeted to the desired community of this kind of rich people. But second of all, you need to also understand that exactly in the status quo right now, the rich are able to have a significant influence in the policy making process. Look at these kind of rich people, right? They lobby politicians. The policies and infrastructure are going to be tailored in the favor of in the favor of the rich people to begin with. We think it's totally not fair when the policies going to be created by the government are going to actually side with the interests of the rich people, but the money and the funding from the tax are not going to be contributed by the rich people itself, but going to take the allocations from the other kind of middle lower class society as a whole. We think exactly because the policy outcome is going to follow the interests of the rich people, they should also be able to contribute and also be the one that funds their own infrastructure projects. For example, like creating infrastructures that sides with their business interests and so on and so forth. We think that's principally why the contribution should also go from tax and not only from the charity that can only go to specific people in the very first place. Because under our side, when we oblige tax, that's the one that is fair. Because the society that want to actually create tax and also infrastructure policies are going to contribute, but the rich people that also have the drive to control the policies are also going to contribute and not going to take the portion out of this kind of middle lower class. Yeah.
Charities are selective in that they fill up back into the state whether it's failure, so minority rights and as such. How does putting money back into the state fix all these niche groups that are currently...
Yeah, I'm going to tell that later in my speech. Second of all, exactly why charities will still be there nonetheless. First of all, we think that some portion of these kind of charities are still... I mean, the rich people can still pay the charities and it's going to be directed to the specific group that they want to, but the difference is they're going to still have to pay tax. It's going to be redistributed to the all people to begin with. So we think that there's going to, in the interest of them to fulfill the donation is still going to be there. But second of all, it also contributes good image to this kind of corporates in the very first place, right? That no matter what group that you're going to actually contribute the tax to, it's still going to help them at the end of the day. But even if it's going to be done, we think it's much better to begin with. Why? Because in most instances, the tax that we're going to get from these kind of people are actually bigger than the money that they spend for the charities to actually create benefit to the society. Because when we actually enforce them to actually pay the tax and not going to be able to not pay it because of they do charity, we're going to have a bigger amount of money from the corporate's income that can actually be translated into more help in society right now. So that's why we think it's much better. But last and most importantly, how do we best help the vulnerable? Exactly like what opening opposition complained. First of all, because we think that the incentive to actually make this kind of poor, whatever the vulnerable groups in society as the voting bloc of the government is going to exist in the very first place. Because we think that exactly the election right now is totally unpredictable, they will have the incentive to actually garner votes and cater their interest no matter what it is, because the unpredictability of election outcome is totally unpredictable, and they're going to grab the niche market as much as possible. But second of all, we think that check and balance is going to exist in the government better because they have a political representation. Under the corporates or the charities, when the rich people are controlling the money, they do not have any representation in the body organization of the charity itself. That's what makes the charity become not specific and targeted, but only going to be tailored to the rich people without any check and balance from the poor. That's why we think it's help better for the vulnerable people under the government side we propose.
In government's world, the government is a perfect actor who cares for every individual in society and doesn't ever discriminate or leave out certain individuals. Unfortunately, such a government fails to exist within a political system that is divided along identity and political lines. Recognize that in this situation, they cannot tell us that every individual in that situation is catered for. To that extent, there's no way that they can come up and tell us that rich people giving to certain vulnerable groups is a bad thing. If I can tell you that governments are a bad actor to allocate resources within the status quo, almost all of government benches' arguments fall. And I'm going to do that in this speech, right? But so so for most of the speech, my constructive material and my responses are going to be integrated. I'm going to talk about a few things. Firstly, let's talk about who loses more money, right? So he came up and told us, oh, if these people wanted to put their money offshore, they will do it anyway, right? Look, no, he doesn't understand how charity works and why rich people donate. Recognize that there is a sunk cost for rich people at the point at which they have to pay taxes, right? This means that they are going to be spending this money anyway. So under our model, right, these individuals are more likely to give this money to charity because of the fact that they are likely to gain some benefit from this sort of charity, right? These are things like positive PR, like I pointed out in my POI, right? Or simply furthering like the rights of certain minorities that you feel deeply for, right? These are things that are important to these individuals, but probably not worth the millions of dollars that they would spend anyway, right? At the point at which this avenue is no longer available, this money is not going to charities, it's simply leaving the country. His response to this then was, oh, let's regulate. Guys, government bench can't have their cake and eat it. If they tell me I cannot regulate my charities, how come they can suddenly regulate where this money goes, right? Recognize that if regulation is a problem on both sides, then at the point at which these people aren't allowed to donate to charities, this money is going to flow offshore unchecked. This is like mechanistic analysis or comparative that like opening government didn't really have, and I'm going to so we've shown you how we actually save more money on our side of the house, because even though there's some outflow, at least at the end of the day, some money goes to like vulnerable groups and charities that help individuals, right? That's an important thing they miss out on. No thank you. Okay, now let's talk about now let's talk about whether or not charities are important, right? So what he told us was, oh, charities don't really matter because it's just catering to specific niche groups, and governments are able to do this. So why aren't governments able to do this, right? I'm going to give you a couple layers of analysis. Firstly, let's talk about the incentive structures of government. I'm going to extend on OG's analysis, right? Not only are they incentivized like to do certain things just because of racism, but more than that, given that you have a political system, right? There are sometimes just certain ideologies that favor certain groups over others. So your conservatives are more likely to give money to the rich and like less likely to help out your minorities than perhaps your Democrats. So when one of these is in power, certain groups are losing out, right? So recognize that because of that, these certain groups are going to be left out. But moving on from this, right, and this is like unique to our side, examine the fact that there are structural weaknesses within governments that prevent them from giving adequate levels of service. Recognize that even in Singapore, right, which is supposed to be this like bastion of efficiency, if you go to a public hospital, you're going to be waiting for 5 hours. This means that the government just isn't able to provide a level of service they are going to get outside. Why are like charities much more able to do this sort of thing, right? Let's flip like opening governments and let's flip opening governments analysis, right? Recognize that they told us that charities have to compete with each other to get funding. To this end, they're not likely to just put up graphic images because anybody can Google search, right? They're more likely to do things like put up like successes, show people what they've been able to do, right? These sorts of things mean that they have to focus on efficiency and like their ability to actually achieve concrete goals. To this end, they're likely to be more successful than these governments who do not or are simply unable because of bureaucracy to like achieve the same level of importance, right? This is important because certain individuals are left out in your political spectrum, right? When like parties have to compromise, not all individuals in your country are going to get the adequate services that they need. So don't let closing government tell you that it's rich people giving more money to vulnerable minorities that they don't need. These minorities need it because the government is simply ignoring them, right? Charities are essentially important. Before I carry on, sure.
If you say that the rich people are that, they're going to do anything in order to get profit, then they're also not going to help the vulnerable people that they cannot extract profit from.
Okay, why? I really explained this in my first class already. I told you that at this point in time, right, the money is a sunk cost. They have to pay the tax or they have to give to charity. They will choose to give to charity because there's some benefit there as opposed to paying the tax, right? So that's why they'll still give to charity. This point, like already lost on government, they should just drop it. Okay, now let's talk about what happens to charities at the point at which rich people stop donating. So, opening opposition told us why charities were important, but never really explained what was going to happen at the point at which rich people stopped donating, right? Inclusive analysis here from closing. What we're going to tell you is that rich people are extremely important to charity. They're often sources of like long-term growth for these charities, right? When you're rich people giving year on year, these are things that allow charities to do things like build schools, which, so when our company tells you that they don't do long-term projects, that's nonsense. But they're able to do these long-term projects, like build schools and set up water infrastructure and water communities, simply because they have a continuing backing of these like rich people, right? But when or even a large that they're going to not be able to get at the same one we already shown you. Like these rich people are common transaction, right? Very important aside from just regular output of things like charity funding. These things require rich people as a process, because these are like essential to getting more from the donation charity or funding, right? Recognize they cut out even some rich the point to which networking, like setting up contacts, all these sort of things are lost under their side of the house, right? That comment. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about is about the principle, right? So now I'm going to respond to the principle argumentation coming out from closing government and stand on our principle itself, right? So what they told us is, the rich people have an obligation to these people, so they have to give back, right? Okay, recognize, guys, that there's two obligations when we pay tax, right? One is an obligation to give back your fair share. So this is what everybody does when they pay tax, right? But recognize that there's a second obligation, right? And it's the reason why rich people pay a disproportionate amount of tax. It's because there's an obligation to ensure equality within your society. So it's a redistributive quality to tax, right? But recognize that redistribution doesn't necessarily have to occur under the government. At the point at which we've already shown you that charities do abject good, it's clear that there's redistribution that happens, and in fact to a better extent under the situation where these people are giving money to charities. So why then can we not force them to give to the government, right? One is just because I've shown you the government is a shitty actor, but more importantly, the government is often diametrically opposed to your goals, right? Recognize that often governments do things, and governments are not so altruistic, right? Often in the US, they're passing a tax bill that really screws over poor people and benefits the rich, or screws over minorities, right? These things mean that often you are forcing these rich people who are already given an added obligation to fund money to things that they actually disagree with and are actually harmful, right? The comparative is that they are free to choose and ensure that their redistributive obligation is met better and more in line with their own goals under our side of the house, and therefore on principle, rich people must be allowed to choose how they use this extra money that they don't have to give back to the state because they've already fulfilled their first obligation of repayment, right? For all these reasons, incredibly proud to stand in opposition.
But within it, it's unfair for opposition to paint the scenario that the compartment that government needs to defend is people are going to opt into tax evasions. If they need to pay on the base case scenario that the charity organization are going to donate, as a band of foreign actors and have significant numbers of society, they also need to engage in the scenario where these people monies are going to be allocated into taxations instead of tax evasion, right? Because we provided analysis in closing government, the tax evasion is something that we are going to fight. We think that it's possible and we think that it's feasible on our side of the house that we minimize tax evasions. That leaves us into several questions in this debate. Number one is the question that closing government posed in this debate. Why replacing taxation with charity is unfair to the victims of historical injustices and the victims of these people accumulating wealth. Number two, I'm going to talk about the exchange of government versus charity organization. Which actor is better? Let's engage. Let's go in the first question first. Why replacing taxation with charity is unfair to the victim? What we heard from our side of the house is that there is an importance of providing specific needs that are needs that needs to be appreciated. The states are otherwise are not going to be able to allocate. Number one, we told you in closing government that these niche market are only considered important by specific numbers of people and no general society. This means that donating computers to people in Africa are less important for poor people in the United States of America because they need Medicare, because they need healthcare, because they need education. At the point of time where the specific needs are not considered important, I don't think where the general society needs to appreciate the willingness of this individual to donate their money giving computers to people in Africa, right? The sacrifices of the general society to appreciate this effort is not necessarily fair in comparison to the damage that they cause us because they don't get the money that they otherwise should get, right? Okay, agree. There are some important things that are maybe important, things like minority rights and so on and so forth, like on the side of the house. But at the point in time in which the minority rights are becoming more and more important, I think that talking about minority rights to be allocated for money and taxation as becoming more politically popular, right? I think these are the reasons why Barack Obama is being elected as president and minority issues are also being brought up within the parliament itself. We don't think that's important. But otherwise, in the other alternate scenario where these people, possibly black people or Hispanic people, they know they are allocating their money to taxation instead of donations or charity organization, there is more incentive for these people to also push government to also allocate this money to specific minority like black people and Hispanic people. At the point of time, we don't think there is any significant difference on the idea of this minority rights if they are considered important. What we told you that it is more likely that these these causes that are not going to be supported by states are causes that are not necessarily important and create a huge benefit towards the society. So like things like providing computers to people in Africa, like what Mark Zuckerberg does, or like giving more like I don't know, like online villages in Indonesia, like what Mark Zuckerberg do. It's not something that people in America should take responsibility of, right? At the point of time, we think that it is more important that we need to understand this. The structural reasons why is it unfair we give you in closing government is because of two things. Number one is because the process of these rich people and an extremely wealthy individual accumulating their wealth and becoming a rich individual is imposing collateral damage to the general society. We told you about resources exploitation. We told you about historical injustices that they make people becoming poor and poor is because of the capitalism that they created. At the point of time when we think that the general society are impacted generally by the way that these people are accumulating wealth, we think that the benefits should not go to the people who are actually becoming the only niche interest of this individual. Instead, we need to go to the general society as a whole. I'm going to take you after my first class. And the second thing second structural reason that we give you in the principle in closing government is because we need to consider that these people, like rich or wealthy individuals, are currently have a significant position within the governmental position. Like they are becoming like politicians or they're becoming like a lobbying power. At the point of time when they have the ability to influence the decision-making process within the government, to be in favor of their business practices and for them to be able to accumulate wealth, it is unfair for them to actually take the money from a middle class and lower class society to actually create an infrastructure that benefits their corporation. Like this is like literally tough. When you actually take money from a middle class and lower class of the society to pay taxation, and this taxation money are not being used by rich people to actually benefit the poor and the middle class society, right? At the point of time when they have a significant influence within the government side of the house, we think that it's much fairer for these rich individuals needs to like compensate it by paying more fair share to the government side of the house. We think that it's principally wrong for these people to compensate the damage on the charity organization rather than the government to affect general society. Yeah.
So your principle is that you must compensate victims of the state. But these are individuals who are victims of a politicized state that has rich voting blocks that control them.
Okay.
Can you tell me what the state has a right
Okay.
to continuous responsibility when it's complicit in the creation of this?
Example my second class, exchange of government versus charity organization, which actor is better. And we need to debunk the characterizations that opening opposition and closing opposition to say that charity organization is a good actor because they're more accountable and they're having a competition. I don't think that accountability in the like charity organization exists on their side of the house. The first reason is because there is no people's representation. This means that people do not have a structural incentive to continuously check up and create check and balances to the charity organization, understanding that they don't think they have right to criticize the charity organization because they don't have representation within the organization. But number two is because it's too many. You have too many like charity organizations that people do not really have time like to scrutinize each of the organizations at the particular time, right? I don't think that accountability exists on their side of the house when people do not feel that they are represented or entitled or relatable with the charity organization. But most importantly, on the side of the house, charity organizations do not need to compete, right? Because at the point of time when charity organizations are going to be automatically becoming a tax haven of rich people, I think rich people are going to donate to this organization anyway, without necessarily having this organization to show a clear impact of a clear benefit of their practices, right? At the point of time that it's become like a safe haven for tax like rich individual or like wealthy individual, we don't think the competition is going to be necessary on their side of the house. What we told you on our side, number one, we told you that government are more accountable because we have a people representation within the parliament, right? I think it's more like clearer that it's more accountable. But secondly, I think the government are competing to create a better impact, right? At the point of time where government have a clear way of their competition within the election, I think it's much better. The only response we heard from opposition is that states are bad because they are politically motivated. One, we told you that politically motivated are fine because you have a dynamic exchanges of government over time. Like maybe like in the 80s you have Democrats that are controlling the government, and next actually you have Republican. I think that's fair to give you rights of a conservative and liberal to hold the government and have the ability to control, because it's not something that is unfair that you have equal chance for you to control the government and equally compete, right? But most importantly, the reasons why currently many actors are left out by government is not because the government are inherently not beneficial actors. It's more likely because they need to make a priority on one sector, they need to sacrifice. It's partly because they don't have enough capital, because the money are going to go to donation instead of taxation, right? At the point of time when the money is going to go to government and taxation, I think the government has less and less incentive to make sacrifices to points that are important. What happens on the side of the house, more minorities are going to be left out, because there are some minorities like black people or Hispanic are do not becoming the target of donations. No, they're also not becoming the target of the states because they do not have sufficient money to also compensate and try to empower them. I think it's much worse on the side of the house for minority people because the case of government.
Thank you very much. How do you do this qualifying?
be very clear. We're not arguing here in this debate that charities need to be a better government than the government. What we're arguing here is that charities simply need to, one, give back to the society in some way or form, and two, do so better for the niche communities that they aim to protect in the very first place, right? I'm going to argue this in three clashes. Firstly, is this principally justifiable? Secondly, does money to charities actually do good? And lastly, is wealthy people giving money to charities better than giving tax to governments, right? So firstly, is this principally justifiable? I'll spend a bit of time on this, right? So the answer is, of course, right? I will give you two key layers as to why this was the case. Firstly, it was because of the obligation of giving back to society, right? And we think that like wealthy people are able to fulfill this in a multitude of ways, right? Not simply just by paying taxation, right? But the second one was the idea of redistribution of money to the rest of society, right? And we think that charities are a great way to do so, right? Because when you give your money through taxes to the government, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be redistributed to the most vulnerable people within society, right? We think that when you use the avenue of charities, this money goes directly into the exact vulnerable people that you're trying to protect, right? CG told you, but the lower layers are not catered to, right? But that's exactly what we're doing, right? That the money to these charities often don't go to your middle class people, right? It goes to the people who actually need that kind of donations and contributions in the very first place, right? So if we can prove to you that the charities use this money for good, right? Then we fulfill the principal obligation which these rich people need to fulfill, right? Which they've been pushing under their side, right? So secondly, does this money to charities actually do good, right? And this was a very strangely mentioned clash, right? Because like there's pretty clear checks and balances that are already in place, right? They considered this under their side when they said, like these measures do exist, right? You can regulate companies as well, right? We don't see why, if you can regulate companies, you cannot regulate charities as well, right? We think the mechanisms largely work in the same way, right? Because structures over time have largely, like the structure of charities over time have largely become more corporate in nature in order to sustain themselves as well, right? No, thank you. So in this, even if these charities are actually used to serve and funnel into some form of self-interest for many of these wealthy individuals, right? It still has to give back to society in some way or form because these regulations currently exist, right? If that's the case, then we don't really see why serving self-interest is a bad thing because it still helps society at the end of the day. Furthermore, I'm going to forward a few more lines of logic, right, that I will mention. Firstly is the current context, right, where there's a greater scrutiny of activities of the rich in general, right, based on things like various scandals that have come up, things like the Panama Papers, or things like, charities just being abused by the rich people in general, right. We think that the current context which we live under is one of great scrutiny of many of these organizations to begin with, right. So in these kind of cases, we think that regulations are likely to be even better in the very first place, right. The last thing is that idea that charities compete for donations, right, and this is something that I'll mention down the line, no thanks, right? So in these kinds of situations, we think that there's already a natural incentive for charities to want to do more good in order to promote that kind of good PR for themselves in the very first place. The counterfactual on their side was the ballot box, right? And the entire government said, this is sufficient. Aru told you, we gave very good analysis on why this simply wasn't the case, right? Because the ballot box, governments don't cater to these groups for votes, right? Because they're simply not large enough. So you cannot say that the ballot box is a good accountability measure because the ballot box is a good accountability measure to make sure that the government takes care of the middle class or the majority of voters, right? But not the niche groups which these charities specifically cater to. No thanks, right? So in these kinds of cases, we don't think that the government is necessarily going to have that kind of long-term commitment to these niche groups in the very first place, right? Then let's really deal with this idea of pet projects which came out from OG, right? They kind of just asserted, pet projects and think tanks are necessarily bad, right? Yeah. We told you no, not really, what? If the pet projects are able to do things like give education to people or help individuals find jobs and skill sets which they otherwise would never have been able to achieve in the very first place, that's a great social good to have, right? I don't think you can place this in a value judgment because different groups have different things to prioritize different things to different extents, right? So insofar as these kinds of pet projects are able to promote that kind of social good, we think that that's a great thing to have and that's perfectly acceptable in terms of fulfilling the obligation that these wealthy people have in the very first place, right? But the last thing I'm going to argue, and I'm going to turn
OG's characterization here on them, right? I'll take you after this, is that if rich people actually do feel good from giving money, right, then ours is the side that has a larger group which is more likely to make sure that the money that's being donated is going to donate well, right? Because on their side, only the ultra-rich people who won't feel the pinch are going to be donating in the first place, right? Under our side, more wealthy people are likely to be one to donate in the very first place because they don't have that extra pinch of those $1 million, right? But when the money goes into these charities, right, when 10% of like the people in the world who own 50% of the wealth actually are willing to donate to these charities, that's when you have greater accountability because all these wealthy people who donate will want to make sure that their contributions go into the kind of social good which creates the kinds of benefits for them. Sure.
We told you that even with the most regulations, tax-deductible wages means rich people can literally give actually zero money to charity and still have their taxes reduced. So you don't have the alternative of tax havens on your side because you said there's regulation.
Okay.
But worst case, right? Governments still have the ability to build infrastructure such as roads that charities can't.
Okay, wait. Roads, infrastructure, that's very great, right? Like, we think governments can do that without contributions of the rich people in the very first place, right? But we think that what like charities do uniquely and require the wealthy people to do is that they need wealthy people in order to create a sustained impact for the minority groups, which governments are likely to ignore under the status quo, right? So what is the most important thing of like checks and balances already exists. I spent like 3 minutes of my speech on this, right? So why is this argument important, right? Because most of the harms from government are based upon the ideas that the money just simply won't be used well. Insofar as we prove to you that this is likely to be the case, we think that we already take this on bench, right? But lastly, is wealthy people giving money to charities better than giving taxes to governments, right? We told you that governments are terrible actors to help the most vulnerable people within society. We gave you reasons like bipolarization that currently exists within this society, right? Where like US healthcare just sucks at the current moment because like the Congress and the Senate just cannot agree on things, right? Things like the kinds of bureaucratic nonsense, right? Or just simply like the amount of burden that is placed upon a government to the extent that they have to stretch their resources and their manpower thing, right? Maybe it's not a problem of they don't have enough money. Maybe it's a problem of they don't know how to manage the money properly because they just cannot do so properly, right? We think that in these kinds of situations, that wealthy individuals are amazing to charities, right? Why is this the case? Because firstly, wealthy individuals have an inherent interest in making sure that these charities are successful, right? This means things like sustained funding for these charities. But more so, our role also told you that it's not just about money, right? That wealthy people bring in influence, connections, right? The other kinds of resources and things, the intangibles that allow for these charities to succeed in the long run. That's when you're able to do things like build up schools, have greater organizations, greater charity funding events, right? That's the kind of long-term build-up that we want under our side, that their side completely neglects because the money doesn't go into these charities, but goes into the tax and the government instead. For all of these reasons, because for us as a society, a better benefit society, extremely proud to stand for jobs.
Back to the hall. Don't go outside.
What do you want?